Hi there, I'm Victoria Pete and welcome to this supplementary version of the week 2 of the Spools of Thread sew along. I've been doing, for the last couple of weeks, I've been doing a sew along where we are learning the basics of foundation paper piecing and we're making a little wall hanging. But what I've done is I've shown you those basics, and you can have a look back on YouTube or on Facebook and see all the tutorials that are going along with this. But today I'm just doing a bit of an extra thing. It's not really a tutorial, it's more of a just watching me sew. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make several of these. I said on Facebook that I'd probably make 7 because I've got 7 more to make. But whether I do or not, that kind of depends on how long this process takes. You might get a bit bored and give up. So I'll make as many of these as I can. The aim is so that you can see the process over and over, so that you can be comfortable as you like with moving forward on making spools of your own. So for this we are going to need a few tools and bits and pieces. You will need your rotary cutter, a glue pen and an add a quarter ruler. You'll also need a standard quilting ruler. I'm just using a 6.5 by 12 inch ruler, so nothing too big. You wouldn't want a 24-inch ruler for today. You'll need some pins and a couple of sewing clips. You'll need your pattern pieces all cut out and ready to go. These are the 3 different pieces that you need, the 3 different sections, the A, B and C sections that you will need all cut out. I've pre-folded mine. If you have a look back in week 1 tutorial of the sew along, you'll see my my suggestions for pre-folding, but you don't have to pre-fold, but I've done that for these. I've then got all my fabrics cut out, and we talk in week 2 about cutting out fabrics and getting yourself all prepared. So these are the fabrics I've got for my A pieces, and then for my B and C, which are the top and bottoms of the spools, I've got the 2 different fabrics required for those. So that's what we're going to do. I hope you find it interesting and useful. It'll be a long video, so you can go backwards and forwards and see me doing the process over and over. And I hope it will be useful. There won't be a lot of commentary. I might talk every now and then, but it'll just be me sewing. So shall we get started? Right, so to begin with, I'm going to do one of each. So I'm going to take and I'm going to start with an A piece. Give myself a bit of space. I don't need that ruler for the time being, and I don't need those for the time being. I just need, to begin with, some fabric. So I'm going to start off with an orange piece, and this first piece needs to be right sides facing down. I'm going to stick a bit of glue on the back of piece number 1. So we're starting with piece number 1. Stick that centrally. If you've got a piece with a print on it, just have a think about whether you want to fussy cut or place the piece wherever you like. And place that on, fold back along the line, and trim to give a sharp edge. Machine on. I'm going to place that right sides together with one of the background pieces and take it over to the machine. Oh, that light's a bit bright, isn't it? There we go, that's changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reduce the stitch length to a 1. You need to go a lot smaller, otherwise you're never going to get your papers out, but you don't want to go too small because, well, it just takes a lot of thread and a lot more time to sew. Those lights aren't great. Why does that keep changing? You're not going to be able to see that, are you? Fallen at the first hurdle. Now I'm just going to go and see. I'm just going to see if I can just turn off one of the lights, just to give us a little bit more clarity on that sewing machine angle. Let's have a look. Does that look any better? A little bit. Let's see. It might. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and sew and see. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I don't know quite why that's doing that, because it wasn't doing that yesterday. I wonder whether it's because there's more daylight outside. It's a really sunny day today. It's lovely, but it's not doing an awful lot. I'm just seeing if I can try and change the daylight on. That's not going to work either. I don't know why that's doing that. Let me just see if I can change the angle of the camera a bit. Oh, this isn't a good start for you, is it? I was hoping this was going to be a really useful video and you were going to be able to see what's going on. It's just an awful lot of glare on that. See, that's still pretty light, isn't it? Okay, well, I'm just going to start. I'm going to just change the lights again. I'm just going to pop around the other side and just see if I can get this sorted. Let's see. I just need to fudge it as we go along. Right, so what I'm doing on this piece here is I've just sewn these two pieces together. I'm just going to press that away from this central section. And I'm going to move on to section 2. Trim that off. Right sides together. Into the sewing machine. I'm going to sew along that solid line. Just make sure when you're putting your fabrics down onto the machine, just make sure that this piece here doesn't accidentally get folded back. It's very easy for that when that goes under the machine just to fold back, so just make sure that that stays flat. Press it away. Just press that away. And then what we need to do is trim off all of that excess. So I'll get my larger ruler and trim off the outside edges. Okay, so there's one A section done. So I'm going to move on and do a B section, because what I'm going to try and do is create each of the spools in turn so that you can see them coming together. So for this we need 2 of the spool end colours and 2 of the background pieces. We're going to start with piece number 1, which is a long rectangle. I'm going to place that fabric right sides down. Place that to allow plenty of fabric around the outsides. I'm going to fold back against the line between 1 and 2, and I'm going to trim that off. Gives us a nice straight edge. Place the fabric underneath, making sure that the fabric extends past where the paper is. Flip that open, picking up carefully. Bring it back to the machine, and I'm going to sew along that solid line, but I'm sewing through the seam allowance as well. Now I'm going to press that back away. And I'm going to repeat with the other little corner. So the line between 1 and 3. Fold it back. Place the other piece underneath, making sure it sits underneath nice and evenly. Take it over to the machine, making sure that this fabric isn't folding as it goes underneath the foot. shorter stitch length. And cut. Now I'm going to press this one away as well. And now we've got, this is where we're up to, and now we just need to sew the other piece on here. So we're going to fold back the line between 1 and 4. So we're just sewing in order of the numbers. And what I'm doing here is you've got this stitching, how I said to sew through the seam allowance. The paper's kind of trapped and it needs to fold back. So I'm just going to tear just a little bit along that little line of stitches so that I can fold back on that line number 4, between 1 and 4. Okay. Trim the seam allowance to be 1/4 inch using my out of quarter ruler. And then I'm adding my final piece, right sides together. Place those neat edges up against each other. And sew along the line between 1 and 4. And now I'm going to press this one away. You can use a seam roller if you have one. You could use some best press or something on your fabrics before you cut them out. And you can use a seam roller. There's a Clover mini one that's really cute. That's really nice. I've got one that I've used for other crafts that I use. Or you can just finger press, up to you, whatever works for you. So now I just need to trim these pieces away. I should really do this on my rotating cutting mat, shouldn't I? And be a little less shifting around. Okay, and then there is your end piece done. Now here I just want to mention something. Someone messaged me, it was Hannah messaged me yesterday to say that she'd done this and she felt like she'd done it wrong already. But what you've got to bear in mind is that this piece here will sew onto here, and both of those have got 1/4 inch seam allowance. So on this, and it looks like, oh my word, I've made this too small and I've made these too big. You haven't, don't panic. The seam allowance, actually, you've got to think about the seam allowance on this piece here, the spool ends, actually runs 1/4 inch from this raw edge. So your seam allowance actually runs higher up. So the junction point where this piece is sewn to this one is actually here. And as you can see, if I place these up next to each other, the junction is higher. So this is the point you're matching, not down here. So don't panic that those look like that. This is exactly how that should look. Okay, so I'm going to move on and sew the other one of those. So I've got a B, let's sew a C. Exactly the same process. Right sides down. Underneath on the machine. Sew along the solid line. Press that back. And in foundation paper piecing, you just need to double check that when you have pressed that back, just do a little check just to make sure that when you look on the solid line, this one here, you need to make sure that your fabric goes 1/4 inch out from that solid line. Here it's easy because it's on a corner and I've already put the seam allowances on for you. But if this is a smaller piece within a bigger project, just make sure that that fabric is 1/4 inch outside, because you've got to think that that piece is going to be sewn to something else. So just make sure that you've got that clearance, if you like. So folding again against line that goes next to piece number 3. Trim. Take your other little piece. And so. I'm going to press back. And you see how I've got myself set up. Try and just make your life as easy as possible for yourself by just making sure that you've got everything relatively close. I know it's not always easy, and it will depend on your setup and whether you've got a sewing room or whether you're sewing at the kitchen table. But what you can do is you can kind of set yourself up at a corner of the table, and you could have your pressing surface just to one side. So you're sewing, cutting, and then you can turn and have your ironing board or something to your left. It just makes the process a lot simpler because you are just doing the same thing over and over again. Place those right sides together, and then sew that final line again. Okay, and then we're going to press that away. And now we trim. Let's try that with our rotating. I'm not sure I've got enough room on here for my rotating cutting mat. Let's see. Trying to squeeze everything on the screen is not so easy. Let's have a look, see if we can get that in. I'm not sure we can. Let's give it a try. No, that's not going to work. Nice idea, Victoria. Give up. Oh, I sound like my mum then. Isn't it weird? Do you do that? When you're chatting, sometimes you just hear your mum come out. Or your dad. But for me, I am a miniature version of my mum. And as is my eldest. My eldest is just like me. The girls are at a new school, and the teachers, as soon as I walk in, they go, "Oh, you must be Charlotte's mum. You look just the same." And we really do. Right, so we have, now we've got the central piece, which is an A, and then you've got your B and C pieces. So let me just turn those around this way. And you'll see in the instructions, there is a diagram that shows you how all of these go together. So you've got B at the top, A in the middle, and C at the bottom. And it will show you how those all come together. And I've got, I think it's solid orange lines that show you those sections and how they come together. So now what we need to do is join the A to the B to the C. Sounds like a bit of a song in there. Now the pieces that the junctions that we're joining together, we'll ignore C for the time being. So if we just look at A and B, at A, the seam point that we're matching is here. These little joins here, and I'll bring those up to the camera in a minute, are joining with these corresponding points here on the pattern. So what I said a minute ago about the seam allowances on the other side, so can we see that? So you're joining this point here on piece A with these points here on piece B. So we're not joining, don't worry about these raw edges. If I flip those over, don't worry about those raw edges looking like they're not going to work and they're not going to meet. So what we need to, the way I do this is that I stick a pin through those points where I've circled those. I'm going to stick a pin through, and on the other side I want it to come out exactly between, or on the seam line between the two fabrics. So on this one I've just poked the needle through, and I'm hoping you'll be able to see it, is that on this one here it's gone through perfectly exactly where I want it to. This one here has come out a little bit on the white. So I know if I use that as my reference point, that's not going to work because that junction's just not going to be really nice and sharp. And that's the joy of foundation paper piecing, you want it to be really sharp. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move that pin a little bit to the left to try and get it between the background and the orange print. So there you go. I've now got that exactly where I would like it to be, between the print and the background. I'm going to do exactly the same piece on this one. So where those circles are on the seam, on the solid seam line, I'm going to stick a pin through, and that's come out between the background colour and the end of spool's colour. I'll do the same on the other side. Caught a little bit of the background. Okay, so I'm relatively happy with those. So those pins are where I would like them to be. I now place this one right sides together on top of the other piece. I tend to have the bigger piece on the underside just because it makes it easier to hold, and it makes it easier when you come to get to the sewing machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to poke these the pins relatively far through on these, and on this one I'm going to whip out this pin, and you can see the hole that it leaves, and then you just poke it through the matching pin through that hole, and so that's through. And then I'm going to take the other one and do the same thing. So I'm just going to take the pin out, watch where the hole goes, and if you lose the hole, just hold it up to the light, you'll be able to see where that hole is, and then I'm just poking that pin through. So I now just have the two pins anchoring through those, and I'm just making sure that they're running perpendicular to the pattern piece, just to make sure that it's as straight as possible. Now on something like this, it's relatively simple because they're just two rectangular pieces that you're joining up, and if you've cut the paper pieces out accurately, those raw edges should meet up. But when you come to do more complicated pieces, that's not always quite so easy to figure out exactly where you're trying to match up. So that's a good skill or a good technique to follow. From here, I'm going to take my sewing clips, and I'm just going to pop in a couple. And then what that means is that you can take the pins out, because obviously you can't run that through the sewing machine because they're not just not going to fit on the flat bed. So I'll take it over to the machine, take my pin out, and now I'm going to sew along this solid line. If you're not sure about what you're doing, you can do a longer stitch length just to make sure that where you're sewing is right and that those points are going to match. Now on these spools, you know what, it's not the end of the world if those points don't match. Oh, my machine's just gone skew. It's not the end of the world if those points don't match. But if you are doing something more pictorial, so you've got a face of something and you're using quite contrasting, quite strongly contrasting colours, then you'll notice if those points don't match. So it does become more important, and that's where I like to be able to just say, okay, just give it a little test first and just make sure, sorry, excuse me, my machine's come undone and I'm just trying to rethread it. Yeah, you just want to make sure that those points match up nicely. Just rethread that. Oh, come on. Oh, my eyesight's getting a lot worse, by the way. I need to get myself to an optician because I'm definitely having problems refocusing, let's say. Right. Here we go. So we'll start stitching through there again. Okay. Just having a squiffy moment. Now we've got, if I just finger press that away, you can see the end of the spool starting to come alive. And again, don't worry about this bit here that looks a little bit more chunky, because that will get swallowed up when we come to attach the sashing, if you like, on the sides. That will start to reduce down in size, so don't worry about that. So that's that piece. I'm now going to attach the other half of the spool in exactly the same manner. Stick the pins through. And on the other side, stick the pins through. And I like these quilting pins. They're clover glass-headed quilting pins. They're nice and they're a good thickness. They're not too thin. They're lovely and long, and of course the yellow heads you can see really easily. Right, so I'm going to just poke that needle, take one out and poke one in. One in. Okay, and then I'm going to put the side clips back. Clip and clip. And then we can take the needles out. Pins, pins, pins. They're not needles, they're pins. So there we go, there's the other half. So let's give that a press. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press this where the excess, this and these smaller pieces are being pressed towards the middle of the spool. And I think that's just because this this little seam here is a little bit more bulky and wants to go this way. In patterns, you'll normally be advised as to which way to press. If you're not, just finger press one direction and then finger press in the other direction just to see where is, you know, kind of looks better and what sits better for you. Sometimes just takes a bit of jiggery pokery. Okay, so there we go. There's another one. There's one done for you. So I've got 3 I sewed. I had one yesterday ready for the week 2 sew along, and then I had one that I sewed in the demo, and now I've got a 3rd one here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue on, and I'm just going to keep making, and hopefully it will be useful for you. And yeah, hopefully. If not, just send me some questions. Let me know if you're stuck with anything or any particular technique that you're struggling with, and I will do my very best to answer, or we could just add it into the sew along next week. You can see. Right, so this one, I've got a stripy design on here. And what you might like to do is, if you're not working with scraps or you're working with specific prints, you might want to fussy cut and just decide on whether you want those little arrows going directly down the middle of your design or you're not bothered. But if you want to, just spend a little bit of time just thinking about where that's going to go in the spool. So I'm just going to put a little fold down the middle, and I'm going to try and aim to get those chevrons running down the middle of this spool. And I'm just making sure that either side of these solid lines that I still have a 1/4 of an inch, and I do just about have a 1/4 of an inch each side, which is good because that's quite fun to have those running down the middle. Trim off the side. Do send me pictures of what you're doing, your work in progress project pictures, because it's really fab seeing how everyone's is coming together and the different colours that people are using, and some people are using from their stash and some people are doing from some new fabrics. That's super. And because I keep forgetting to mention it, I have a gallery of makes on my website that I have started populating with projects that people have made. So if you go onto the website and have a look under gallery of makes, you'll be able to put in spools of thread gallery of makes, because I've got a few gallery of makes for other projects. So put in spools of thread gallery of makes, and you'll see some of the projects that people have sent me pictures of, or I've seen on social media. You are more than welcome to send me pictures of your finished projects, and I would love to add them because it's nice. I always think it's really lovely to be able to see how other people have made exactly the same project, because we'd all choose to do it slightly differently, wouldn't we? Okay, so there's your middle done. Oh, it looks good. I'm glad I put the little stripes in the middle. Looks nice. Right, so we're going to move on and do top and a bottom. Let's see if we can do two at once. So we need two of those for each. And we need two of these for each. Okay, let's start off with doing piece number one. Dab of glue. And this is just a fabric glue, use a lot for EPP and sticking zips in and all sorts. This face down. It's a nice washable glue and just comes out in the wash. Dries clear, it's not too tacky, it's just a temporary adhesive, just enough to hold things in place temporarily. Take this over to the machine and those right sides together. This is where if you have a nice big extension table, that's quite nice to use as well, because then you can just sort of slide things across. And in terms of the foot that I'm using on my machine, I'm just using a standard clear straight foot, using foot A on my Elna 720 Pro, just so that you can see where you're going. You don't need a walking foot. Right, and we're going to do the other corners, piece number 3. Fold it back. And I've pre-folded those so they're folding back quite easily, but you could use a card or the packaging that comes with your add a quarter ruler. You see that? I've just thrown that rubbish on the floor. I've stopped throwing everything in the bin and it's now just on the floor. That will be a fun little job for later, won't it? So lazy. Well, I just thought the plastic bag's rustling. I should have had a nice cloth bag or something. There. Okay. Well, it's getting a bit cloudy outside. I hope that helps with this light. It's terrible, isn't it? I don't know why it was okay yesterday, but today's rubbish. Sorry. Not very clear at all. Consume it professionally. There we go. Stick the other one under. One behind. And pressing both of those away. I must say, I do prefer doing this by iron than finger pressing. I find it just gives slightly sharper results, but that is personal preference, completely up to you. And the pressing mat that I'm using is a wool pressing mat, and I really love it. It's about half an inch thick or so. I don't know how thick that is. Should we look? God, look at that, half an inch thick. Holds the heat really well. I find it absolutely super for both patchworking and for dressmaking projects. Really, really lovely. And if you're following along with the sew along, you'll have seen that there's a discount with Emma Bradford has offered us. She was also one of the Sewing Quarter guest designers, and she's got the Swift Quilting Company, and she's got a shop and she does courses and long arm quilting and all sorts, and she very, very kindly has offered 20% off for anyone taking part in the sew along. I don't think there's any special thing you need to do to prove that you are taking part, but there is a discount code in the main tutorials for the sew along. So if you wanted to get yourself 20% off, just have a look back in either week 1 or week 2, and the discount code will be in there for you. But she sells the wool pressing mats. She's also got add a porter rulers, and you might need a new blade for your rotary cutter. You might want some sewing pins. You can use it on whatever you like from her shop. I might even need to buy something myself. There are no fabric shops where I'm living. It's driving me crazy. Okay, press both of those back. And the iron I'm using is a Prim mini iron. I really like it. I like that it's not too big, it's not too unwieldy, it doesn't take up too much space. And yeah, it's really easy to hold. I like it a lot. That one's gone a bit skewy. What have I done there? I've rushed. Don't rush. Now, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, I've done something really weird here and it's gone a little bit wibbly. What I've done is I've just not pulled the fabric. Well, I've pulled the fabric as I've sewn, so it's a little bit odd. But I'm hoping what I might do is just give that a bit of a press and see if I can press my way out of a problem. It's always worth a try. That's so bad. I'm going to leave that I'm going to press that and leave that to cool on the pressing mat. I'm going to trim this one down and then I'm going to add that one to, oh no, I need that ruler. That's not going to work. I'll stick this on it instead. Right, need the ruler, trim down. See, everyone that said that they wanted to watch me do some sewing are now really sorry because they're just listening to me whitter on, doing a repeated process over and over. Right, your rotary cutter. Should we ever talk about your rotary cutter? Try and use a sharp blade, unlike me today, who's not using a sharp blade. And make sure that it's got a safety feature on it. And I mean, I'm not sure I've ever seen a rotary cutter that doesn't have a safety feature on it. But try not to leave your blade in the exposed position. This one I've got here has got a little lock on it, so that when I extend the blade, well, it locks, so I can't extend the blade whilst that's in the lock position. So I've got to open it to release the blade, but as soon as I take my fingers off that handle, the blade goes in, which is great. It will lock in the open position, which is what I do when I'm cutting, but I always take that safety off again so that it can't accidentally be opened by a child or. And I don't know who else. There's no one else in my life. My husband's not going to do it, but you know, you get my point. Just to make sure that it's nice and safe. And you get yourself into a bit of a routine of letting the blade come out and then popping it away again. Now, just a little note on if you are using your directional prints, this shouldn't matter. If you're using the same colour for the tops and the bottoms of the spools, it shouldn't matter at this point which one goes on which half. But if for some reason you've decided you want the tops one colour and the bottoms another, then just make sure that you're bearing in mind what you're doing with your directional prints. You wouldn't want to sew it on upside down. You'd be jolly cross with yourself. Because I have sewn things upside down. I sewed a dress. I was quite young. I was probably 18-ish. And I'd made this dress and I really loved it. And it looked great. And I was just at the final stage. I just had to hem it. And I put it on. And I went downstairs to see Mum and Dad. I said, oh, what do you think about my dress? And Mum's saying, oh, it's lovely. It's really nice. And Dad says, well, it's nice if you want an upside down dress. And I'm like, what? And I hadn't realised I bought this print. And I'd carefully cut the print. to sit nicely on this central panel. But I hadn't realised that it actually had a bit of a picture to it, if that makes sense. It was almost like Chinese writing or something. It was quite big. It was quite a big print, but I had cut it out upside down, and I was so cross. I didn't have any more of the fabric spare, and that was it. Went in the bin. I thought, well, I actually first of all had a teenager strop and threw it across the room. Well, I did. Well, I didn't. I didn't, like, you know, strip my clothes off and start throwing clothes across the room. But I did. I went and got changed and then just threw it in the corner of the room. I was not happy. Proper teenage strop. But you know what? You learn by your mistakes. And I'm not sure I will do that again, she says with great confidence. So there's that half. Right, let's have a look at this piece. Let's trim it down and just see whether it will meet the grades. I think it might. For what we're doing, I think it might. But if you make a mistake in foundation paper piecing, you can unpick. Unpicking is quite painful if you're using your shorter stitch length. But sometimes when it's a small piece, if it's something like this and you really have made a mistake, or you've done one of these central pieces and you haven't quite got the positioning right, if you fussy cut, sometimes it's just easier just to start again with a new bit of fabric, print out another copy of the pattern and just start again, because those little stitches can be quite a pest. The other problem you get when you're unpicking is that, of course, the reason that we do a shorter stitch, which is probably worth mentioning before this point in proceedings, is so that you can remove your paper later on in the process. And you can see what it does is that shorter stitch length just makes it perforated. So it means that you can remove the papers. But if you've unpicked that stitching, the papers just become less of a foundation, and it makes it too difficult to use again. So sometimes it is just easier just to start again. Save your sanity. Some more things to life than unpicking. Or just wing it, just go, you know what, it doesn't matter. Once you finish your quilt or your project, it may not even matter. People may not notice. Just sticking those pins through again. Oh no, I was about to start humming away. That's not good for anyone. I'm not a singer, I must say. Okay, take the pins out, over to the machine, and so. Okay. Oh, I've just pressed a button on my phone app to change the screen, and I'm hoping that I haven't messed it all up. I don't know what that button does. It's a brand new button. I don't know. I may be just talking to myself for the rest of this. Okay. Okay, so there's the next one. Shall I give that one a bit of a press as well? Just finger pressing it first, just to make it a little bit easier to get the iron onto it. Looks really good. I love the oh, I'm wearing a stripy top as well to go with it today. I hope the stripy top's not making you go all squiffy on the screen. Okay, so let's have a look at that. So there's the next one. So we are now, let's see how many I can hold at once. Pulling together a nice selection of spools. Helps if I hold it to the right camera. So there are the spools all coming together. We move on, let's do a yellow one. Keep going, you don't need to watch anymore, it's up to you. you can give up at this point if you know what you're doing, or just continue to watch. Just pretend you're keeping me company. I don't know whether there is anyone watching, because what I've done is I've put this on live, and I've got absolutely no idea whether anyone's watching, because I've not done it on YouTube before. I've only ever done it on Facebook. Makes me sound like a professional, doesn't it? I just do it all the time on Facebook. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm totally winging it as I go along. A lot of time spent on the internet trying to find resources to help me do what I'm doing. Right, I'm going to try and put this one in the middle. I really like that one. The problem is that this little chevron-y bit here is very close to this edge, so I'm just trying to squeeze it in. Just do it. Just do it. I know this is a 3, and you should always do 1, 2, 3, etc. But I'm just going to do this piece first, just to make sure that it doesn't shift around. So you don't want to lose that little bit of seam allowance. Good. I like that one. These are lovely prints. I like them a lot. They're left over from a Tula Pink charm pack that I had when I was doing some prep for a sewing quarter project. I can't even remember which project. There were so many. But yeah, there were some charm packs left over, and I thought, oh, just perfect for this project. So I've trimmed off 1/4 of an inch, matching up those raw edges. So again, let's go. Oh, Joe's messaged in. She said 2 of us are watching. Hi, that's really lovely. Oh, Joanne, that's so lovely. Thank you. Oh, I'm surprised you're not bored to tears, but you're more than welcome to watch. I just wish there was someone here to get me a cup of tea. A cup of tea would go down really well. We were late to school this morning. Girls had gymnastics last night. They've started rhythmic gymnastics, and they were up late with training last night because they've got, well, they should have a competition this weekend, but due to worldwide events, it's happening behind closed doors. But they were up late with practice last night, so they were up late this morning, and then Charlotte announced, my 11-year-old announced, oh, I've still got some long division I haven't finished. So there was loads of rushing around this morning, so I've had, well, I've had my breakfast, but I've not had much to drink, so I'm going to spend a cup of tea. It'd be lovely. So if there's anyone in Gibraltar who would like to just pop a cup of tea over the balcony, that would be really nice. Okay, so that's the middle section done. Oh, I love it with the stripes going down the middle. Super. Let's do 2 more of these. See, I like to pretend I'm organised, but crikey, look at the mess I'm making here. All right, let's put these pieces with those and put the spools over here so you can kind of see those coming together, and those with those. Right, I'm on it, I promise. So I'll do these together, and like we did last time. I know it sounds really dull. I put a message out on Facebook just to say, hey, if I did this, you know, live and just showed you me sewing, would you watch? Thinking, I'm not sure anybody would, but actually I was really surprised at how many people said they'd find it really useful. And you know what, with Sewing Quarter and now with Natasha and with John, I just like to sew and have people on in the background because it just feels like company. I think a lot of the time you end up just doing things on your own at home when you're crafting. There's not always an opportunity to go out and sew with people. So to have something on in the background, I think it's really lovely. It's really nice. Must be coming up to, what are we, with the 6th? So that means that Jane Alcott must be going back onto Natasha Makes soon with her block of the month. And they must be nearing the end of that, actually. It's been going for a while. It'll be lovely to see them. And it does feel, I always feel like it's like you're inviting people into your home when you're watching on TV. I think everybody feels really familiar. I guess that's why people love it so much. But bad luck, you've got me today. Press those. Joanne, you went to the dentist yesterday. I hope you're feeling all right today. Didn't have any major work done. I do need to go because we've moved over to Gibraltar for my husband's job, and that's one thing it's not the only thing I haven't sorted out, but it's one thing I haven't sorted out yet is dental. And you kind of think I should probably get it sorted out before I need a dentist, if that makes sense, because in a dental emergency you don't want to be not knowing who to call. Mummy points for that one. I did. It's so bad. I did go 8 years without going to the dentist when I was younger. That's really naughty. And when I say younger, not when my mum was in charge, when I was a fully grown adult in charge of my own destiny, I didn't go. It's very naughty. But now I've got children, I'm very responsible, and I go lots. It's on the list. Right, so I'm sewing again through those seam allowances. Next one. A light box is quite good. If you have a light box, that's quite good for fabric placement if you're really not sure about what you're doing and you've got more complicated shapes. This has got a couple of little triangles, but when you start doing more advanced paper piecing, some of the triangular sections start to become really difficult to work out. So to have a light box is really useful. I mean, you can obviously use nature's light box and stick it up against a window, but that might involve getting out your seat, going over to a window. But yeah, that, or a bright light or something, just to make sure that you are being accurate with your fabric placement. Back, folding back. Other one. Oh, and if someone is bringing in a cup of tea, just like a biscuit would be nice as well. I'm trying to be really good. I'm trying to cut back on sugar because I eat so much terrible food. Problem with working from home and having 2 children in the house is that you have lots of rubbish food, far too much rubbish food, and I'm a real procrastinator. When there's a tricky job to be done, I'll just go, you know what, I'll just see if there's something to eat, and I'll scoff some food, and it's really bad. So I've said, right, I'm going to cut back on the sugar in a hope that mentally that will stop me from eating all the rubbish. Be really useful if anyone watching at any point, at any time, just let me have some feedback on the video. Obviously the lighting on the actual sewing machine isn't great today. I don't quite know why. It might be to do with the sunlight outside. I might need a heavier curtain or something. But just generally, it would be really useful to have some feedback in terms of, you know, are the angles okay? I've tried to, I can't get any more cameras. So the camera angles we've got are what we've got. So I've got one on my face, one overhead, and one on the camera, on the sewing machine. That's as many as I can cope with, and my system can cope with. But I've tried to zoom as high as possible so that you can still see the sewing machines and cutting space and the pressing surface. But if that's zoomed out too far, if you think that I don't need to show you the pressing surface, I could zoom in closer here so that this isn't quite so small to look at. But your feedback on that would be really useful, because I don't want to just change things and you say, oh, well, I can't see and I'd like to be able to see the pressing. Just let me know. This is all still quite new for me. So yeah, just let me know what kind of works and what you need to see and what you're not seeing. Show me the other one. somehow I quite like doing the B's and C's together. I mean, I'm sure I save a little bit of time by doing that. I think it's quite nice when you can get 2 sections finished at the same time. Ta-da! That's quite satisfying. So we'll do the same process again with the pins, and we'll get those attached together. Now what you could do is you could do all the A and B sections together and do all of your A sections together so that you've got all of them, and then you could do this process and then they effectively all come together at once. It's up to you. It depends on how you like to sew and what you find satisfying. Look through that hole, take out the pin in the bottom one and in the top. Stick in a sewing clip, make sure they're perpendicular, take the pins out and sew. Always just double check, open it out. Oh, helps if I change back. I always just open it out, just double check it's okay before I move on to the next stage. And if you are feeling like you're in a helpful mood, just let me know if there's anything else with foundation paper piecing you'd like to learn, because what I could do is I could do some more mini tutorials that focus a little bit more on tools or different shapes or anything else. Just let me know, and I'll try and think about any tutorials that I could do going forward. Because it's all very well me saying, oh yeah, I'm going to do this, that and the other, but if that's not what you guys are after, there's not as much point, is there? May as well do something you want to watch. Just don't include singing or dancing, because that's not happening. I'm tone deaf, but not as tone deaf as my brother. Don't tell him I said that. Oh dear. Go. There's the next spool. Oh, they're looking so good. I'm so glad I've done these prints. They're fab. So the one I did is for the original sample was Alison Glass, and then these ones are Tula. And have you seen, if you've watched week 2 of the sew along, I did, and Joanne's just reminded me, I did these little letters, which are for the more adventurous, shall we say, of us that are looking for something a little more challenging. So what I've decided to do is, Joanne, thank you for suggesting, I'm going to do a series of tutorials. So last night I was, what I've done is I've pretty much worked out all of the letters and the patterns. Some of them I think might be a little bit tricky, so they might need revisiting. And then I sat and worked out in order which ones I think were easiest to, I ranked them simplest to the most difficult. And I think what I'll do is I will film some tutorials to take you through each of those letters. So, but I'll start off with the easier ones. I'm not saying they are easy, they're absolutely not for beginners. But I'll start off with the ones that are easier, and then I'll move on through to the more complex ones so that you can kind of build up skills. But for that, I would suggest using an add an eighth ruler, because some of those, some of those little pieces are very little. And by reducing that seam allowance down to 1/8 of an inch rather than 1/4 of an inch makes a massive difference. But I thought they'd be just a little bit of fun. And what you can do is you can either make this sort of little sampler mini wall hanging with the letters in them, or you could join up some of your spools together on, I think it would be really lovely to have on a little pouch or a sewing caddy or something like that, to use those to personalise. I think would be really fun. Would be really lovely. You have to excuse me if I forget to change the camera angle. Standing, sewing, talking, concentrating, changing the camera angle. Oh dear, classic bit of multitasking. Not always done with skill. Doing my best. Doing my best. So trim those down. You know what, I didn't even pay attention as to how long I've been going. So once I've just done this little bit, I might just see how long I've been going for. And see whether I stop after this one or whether I keep going, because, well, I don't know. Depends how interested you are in watching. Get these ready. See, that looks nice, doesn't it? Two of those, two of those. Four of those. Let's have a look. I'm just going to have a little look on. No idea. I'm looking on YouTube. Oh no, it says there. Oh, I've been going an hour. Whittering an hour. I'll keep going. I'll keep going. Don't worry. The more times you can see something, the more times you can repeat it, then the more likely it is to go in your head. And that's what foundation paper piecing skills are for me, is just repeating the processes, just to try and embed it in. And I think also when you learn a skill, to be able to practice as soon as you can is really, really valuable, because I think sometimes if you do foundation paper piecing, you go, yeah, I've totally cracked it, I really know what I'm doing. If you leave it too long, you come back to it and go, no, I actually have no idea as to what I'm doing. So practice, 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 and you're more likely to get it embedded into your brain as to what you're doing. One thing to note on foundation paper piecing patterns, this is this pattern that I have, the spools of thread, has no left and right, if that makes sense. But there are some patterns that do have a left and a right. If you look at my Kingfisher pattern, that one has a very definite direction, in that if you sew it one way, you know, he'll end up facing a different way. But it's also important to know whether a pattern's been reversed. And you know what, having said that, I don't know whether I put this in the pattern. It's useful if, so let's just have a look at on here. So what you might do is you might decide that you want a different colour on each side of the spools. You might be creating like a shadow effect or something. So you need to know that piece 3, where that's going to end up on the finished piece. So quite frequently you'll get pattern pieces that have already been reversed. It should tell you in the pattern whether a pattern piece has already been reversed or not. Some you'll have to reverse yourself in order to keep the numbers in the right place, if that makes sense. I'm not sure that does make sense, but it makes sense in my head. But you're effectively creating a mirror image of what's on your pattern piece, because you're sewing to the back of the paper. And in terms of papers, I use just standard copier paper. I use 80 GSM, cheap as chips, from the supermarket or wherever. You can buy specific foundation paper piecing paper, which is thinner, and you can normally buy it in sheets that you can run through your printer. So they're worth, give it a try. I'm not saying use them or don't use them, but I think anything's worth a try once to see whether you absolutely love it. So you never know, it might be your most favourite thing ever. If you don't try, you'll never know. As I say to my youngest with food, if you don't try, you're never going to know. It might be the most delicious thing in the world. Now, unfortunately, she's got the measure of us, because it's normally something like vegetables that we're trying to convince her to eat. or anything with any form of flavouring at all. Oh my word, she's not great at eating, I must say. She anything with any form of spice or flavouring, no, no, too spicy, too spicy. And you think, Emily, it's pepper? It's just pepper. Bless her little heart. I'm sure she will come round to it. Sorry, Dissy, I did it again. Did I leave you with that sewing machine all that time? Rubbish, bad marks. I need a director, someone to come and do all the hard work for me. I can do the same, not a problem. It's everything else that's a challenge. And I don't know about anyone else, but technology I love. It's brilliant. The things you can do with technology are absolutely amazing, but oh my word, sometimes it just frustrates the living daylights out of you. You think something should be so easy, and you end up spending an absolute age trying to sort it out. Our printer and Wi-Fi is a good example, or a very bad example. So it connects to Wi-Fi, brilliant, and you go, yay, it's all connected to Wi-Fi, and the minute everything turns off, it resets itself and it won't reconnect. Who knows? Who knows? I need a technology whiz to come and sort it out. I also, on my internet browser, I can't get spell checker to work. It works on all my other documents and programs, applications, everything works absolutely fine, but I cannot for the life of me get it to work. So whenever I do my emails or blog posts, anything, just the spell check doesn't work. Frustrating. Again, just make sure that little bit of fabric on the underside doesn't flip out of the way. Oh, Joanne, you've just made a good suggestion. You're saying that your mum has difficulty with a smaller size, so we're going to print larger and see how that looks. The only thing you need to bear in mind, absolutely you can scale foundation paper piecing patterns. Just remember that what you're doing is you're also, let me show you on here. What you're doing is, if you're scaling this up, great, but what you're doing as well is you're changing this seam allowance. So what you might need to do is just redraw that seam allowance, and you can use something like your add a quarter. Just place the little lip part, place that on the solid line and redraw. Or sometimes you can buy these little acrylic rulers. I've got one like this, and I don't necessarily mean like this. There's something that you quite frequently you'll get free with a magazine or something, and it looks like a little clear bar that's 1/4 of an inch. You can use that up against the outsides of your pattern pieces to just redraw that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. But yes, you can scale up. Yes. Trim those. When I normally sew, I do normally have a lot more space than this. I don't normally put my sewing machine quite so close. I'm not saying it makes me any tidier. Just give yourself as much space as you can. I think I'm just about ready for a new blade in this. Okay, next spool piece. I'm glad I chose the burgundy as well. It's quite nice as a change from the black. I think black always looks nice as an accent to the really bright colours. I was just looking at the different colours within the prints that I'd chosen, and I wanted something different to the black. And I looked at some greens, and I just I laid out the little 5-inch squares that I had on a number of different colours of fabrics, and the burgundy just spoke to me. Just seemed like a nice combination. There we go, so the next one coming together. We'll go back to the pins. So in week 3 of the sew along, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we actually start to construct the mini quilt top, if you like, and then we'll have a word about taking out papers, because not everyone knows when to take the papers out. I tend to leave them in until you really do have to take them out, because they do create a good stabilizer or foundation, because the clue's in the name. They create a good foundation and they keep everything nice and neat. Now, another tip that I've got for you is, you see how this piece here is loose? When it's small, it doesn't really matter, but sometimes if you've got a long triangular piece, or this piece is a little bit big, what I would do is I would take my glue pen again and just stick in a little bit of glue along here just to hold that in place. So if you've got something that's flapping around, you can always do that. Add a bit of glue. Don't be tempted to use your standard school issue glue or your glue stick. You really do want something that you know is designed for fabric and is washable, because you don't want to make things too stiff, because that's what having the glue will do. It'll make it a lot stiffer and it makes it more difficult to sew through. That one's not quite right. Just need to move across a bit. The paper wasn't quite sitting right. This one's a bit skewy. Should wing it and see. Just pinning those. Hold your breath. Hold your breath. Let's see, ready? I'm going to look myself first. Oh no, it's okay, it's okay. I wasn't sure, that wasn't quite sitting right, but that's come out okay. Okay, do the next one. And again. You're on several through on the spools. What am I on? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th one. You start to get your eye in and you start to see where your pins are going. Oh, except, oh no, that's okay. I thought I'd missed the fabric. Okay, stand out, stand out. Okay. Clip those. Take my pins out and back to the sewing machine. Check of that. Yep, that one's okay as well. Give that a press. And I would ordinarily let those cool a little bit longer, maybe with something heavier sitting on top of them, because they're sort of curling up a bit. It's not to worry, because they will all get trapped later down the process. Good, aren't they? Oh, I love seeing it all come together. Right, should we do one more? Why not? Well, I've got to do all of them for next week anyway, in preparation. So I figured I may as well do all of them. Although I wonder if I should just leave one to redo at the beginning of next week's episode. Oh no, I'll leave it, because people can look back here, or they can look back on the main week 2 to see how to do it. So maybe I'll do all of them ready for next week. Being a good girl, doing my homework. Plenty of time. Green is lush, it's lovely, with the accent of the blue. Oh, wonderful. Almost Japanese feel to that print, you know, like with the waves. I can't remember the name of the artist, but there was a good documentary on BBC iPlayer a while ago about the artist that did the waves, and I only managed to see half of it. We struggled to get BBC and BBC iPlayer over in Gibraltar. It's very much hit and miss, so I would like to catch up on that. Okay, give that a press, and then that's another A section ready to be trimmed. I love the trimming process because it goes from something that just looks like a randomy bit of patchwork to something that has a bit more potential. I don't, I've got the wrong line. There we go, another middle. Oh, it looks so good, it looks so good. And those. And a little. In the middle. On the wrong side of the first piece of fabric. First piece of fabric, always right sides down. Following the numbers, piece 1 is the first piece that you put down, and piece 2 is the first piece that you're going to join on. Number 2 is the first piece that we're going to join on. So we just trim back to give us a nice straight edge to follow. And you don't want all this excess fabric in your project anyway. So, over to the machine. Right, it's not getting any better, is it? I thought as the sun moved around it might get a bit easier. It has not, so I can only apologise. I have to have a bit of a think about what to do about that camera. Was it okay yesterday? I'm sure it was okay yesterday. But I remained so long. Okay, press these 2 pieces back. trim the next two pieces off. So piece number 3, fold that corner down, and I've pre-folded all of those to make it easier to just flip back with my finger. You can use the postcard method, but I find that when you start to follow more complicated pieces, I find it gets a little bit bulky underneath. And to fold it back with the card, I don't feel it's as easy, but it's, like I said earlier, just do what works for you. Give both methods a try, and see what's easier, what you feel more comfortable with. Give those a press. And then the final chop to take off the seam allowance so that we can add piece number 4. Just tearing that paper back because we've sewn through the seam allowance just enough. See, I've stopped throwing it on the floor, haven't I? Good girl. I'm actually, sewing standing up's a really weird thing, but I know quite a lot of people like to do it. But I do get a sore back sometimes if I spend too long standing, or too long just doing the same repeated process. I find really difficult. But I have got Charlotte Newland had it's like a memory foam mat, it's almost like a doormat kind of size. Yeah, I'd say it's a bit of a doormat size. And yeah, it's like memory foam, and it's brilliant. I really love it. It takes some of the pressure off your feet, and it does help. So Charlotte, thank you. Useful suggestion. We'll give these a press. And in yesterday's video, I did say about being careful about pressing on the paper side of your pieces, because when you traditionally do patchwork, you normally press to set the seam and then you open. Try not to press on the paper side, because depending on the ink that you've used, you can transfer that over onto your iron. And then, of course, when you come to press your fabrics, that then transfers horrid ink onto your fabrics. And you absolutely know it'll transfer onto your lighter coloured fabrics, without a doubt. Just to annoy you and make you cross. What I'll do is I will, once I finish this video, I'll then mention to people on Facebook that they can go and watch, should they need it, because I think it's nice to sometimes get something repeated over and over. And it's difficult in this digital world, when you've got someone showing you how to do something. Yes, you've got the rewind function, but you don't always, well, it's sometimes easier just to catch the same process next time round, if you like. Where's that one going together? Oh, now see what I've done here. Okay. Right. What I've done is I've rushed, obviously. Not paid attention. This little piece, this white piece here, when I sewed it on, before I sewed it on, I placed it a little bit too far to the left-hand side. So you can see here that the fabric doesn't quite make it up in the same way that these ones do. They come up into a bit of a point. Now what you don't want is this raw edge here poking out when you come to sew that piece. Oh, balance those. When you come and sew this piece to this piece. So what I'm going to do is just start with this one and just stick my pin through and just make sure that that's going to be trapped within the seam that joins these two together. And if it isn't going to be trapped, then I would do that piece again. I would just start again, I think. So thankfully, you can see, and I'm not sure how to best demonstrate this. I've done the usual trick of sticking the pin through so it comes out the other side. So you can see that's where the seam will run, but the seam will run parallel to this raw edge. I'll move everything on the underside. So if you look at, and I've got the little lip on here, so I'm just going to place that on there just to make sure that as the seam runs down, you can just see that raw edge, that bit that didn't quite make it to the edge, is encased within the seam that will run along this edge. But if it had done, you can see that, you could see here where it's kind of sticking out, that you would have to do again, because that will then show in your finished project. But because that's going to be within that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, that's going to be absolutely fine. Panic over. So you get that little nugget of information if you've been stoic enough to make it this far in the video. Pins in. And out. In. Sewing clips. And over to the machine. Oh, Joanne, you're still with me, bless your heart. You get a gold star for today. Right, look. That's come out nicely as well. Oh, I find this so satisfying. Foundation paper piecing is the best. It's wonderful. You just think there's no, I mean, to get these accurate points by traditional piecing methods would be somewhat of a challenge. A bit to the left. Oh no, wrong way to the left. Sometimes it's just the odd thread, and sometimes you miss it by a mile. Out. Okay. Have a look at that one as well. Very good. what I'd love is one of those wooden clappers. They are so good because they just draw out all the heat from what you're doing, and they set seams really beautifully. It's on my shopping list. Right, so here we are. That one, if you press it, it's a bit flatter whilst we're looking. Looks good, doesn't it? And then I've just got 2 more to go. They're probably not quite in the right order, but yeah, 2 more to go. I think what I'll do is I will I'll probably stop here. Let me just have a look on YouTube. I've got absolutely no idea how to stop, but yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll stop there, and I'll just keep doing those. I've got 2 more to do, but I think you've probably got the process by now. If you're stuck with anything, go back to week 1 or go back to week 2 and just go through those, and just let me know if you've got any questions, or you're really stuck on anything. Send me a photo either through Messenger on Facebook or on Instagram. I use Instagram a lot as well. So just send me a picture. Hannah sent me one the other day, just going, oh, I hope I've done it wrong already, but she hadn't. So don't worry if you're at a point at which you're thinking, oh, I'm not sure. Just send me a picture or ask on the Facebook page, because there are all sorts of people that are really happy to help out. But I hope that's been really useful. It feels a bit weird to just be sewing and talking nonsense. But I hope it has been really useful. And leave me a comment, subscribe to the channel, because the more people subscribe, the more people that will find me, and the bigger the community will get, which will be brilliant. And we can just make sure everyone is foundation paper piecing all the time. But thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll catch up with you soon. Bye.